All right, so we're not yet to the point where we can tell intentionally funny stories. What can we do with language? Well, I mentioned Siri. Siri may not be the best at telling bedtime stories, but Siri does some amazing things. The pieces that make that up are used actually in many places in industry. There's automatic speech recognition, where you go from speech to text. There's text-to-speech synthesis, which is an easier problem, where you go from the text to speech. And then there's dialogue systems that integrate all this together, linguistic analysis. Let me show you what a speech recognition system looks like, just kind of when you point it at the TV. So this is not customized to a specific speaker. This is not over some great microphone, like how your phones have really sophisticated microphones these days. This is just plugged straight into the TV as essentially automatic transcription. Let's see how well it does. And in particular, watch the errors.
Friends, family, and classmates said their final goodbyes yesterday at her funeral in East Falls. Now, Asia Adams was buried today, and on this day, a major break in the case. Police sources tell NBC 10 that a person is in custody and appears to be a strong suspect. They will have more information in the morning. Reporting live from police.
So, what's interesting about this? First of all, is it good? Is it bad? Right? It does a lot of stuff, right? It does a lot of things right. It makes some mistakes. The
Friends, family, and class
are of multiple kinds. So for example, here, the classmates said their final goodbyes. That's like goodbyes, like Best Buy, right? That is exactly the sounds that the reporter said. The failing here in this case was not in the acoustic modeling, which tries to connect the waveforms to the underlying linguistic sounds. Here the failing is there are multiple things that sound the same, and you got to figure out which one the reporter could possibly mean in the context. And, this is a sad story, right? Somebody died, people are not going shopping, right? And we know this as humans. But the system does not, and so in this case, it's a problem in the language model. There are other cases in here where the problem is more in the acoustics, and putting all of this stuff together in some probabilistic framework that lets you reconcile it all, that's a big part of how speech recognition works. We'll have more discussion on that later. We can do more with language than just manipulate the signal from speech to text. This is actually my research area. We can do things like question answering. We talked a little bit about Watson, and we'll have a lot more later in the course about Watson. So Watson is basically a question answering system. Like, yeah, there's this layer of remembering to phrase it as a question because you're on Jeopardy and making sure you wager the right amount on the daily double and that kind of stuff. But to a first approximation, a question comes in, Watson kind of has to dig through a lot of information, like, largely Wikipedia, and connect up some answer to the question so that you know how to respond. Basically a question answering system, although an amazingly cool demonstration of a very good one. Another thing we can do is machine translation. How many of you have used a tool like Google Translate? So, again, C3PO. How good is machine translation? Well, depends on the language pair. I mean, if I'm looking at a page, say, in Chinese, and I don't speak any Chinese, the machine translation's pretty good, because I was kind of starting with nothing. But if I actually speak the language, maybe I'm better off reading it in its natural form. You can see some of these problems if you do round trip from, say, English to Chinese and back, and you can see how good what comes back. Actually, that's a good way to make an unintentionally funny story. What else can we do? Things like web search really are about a lot of things, right? It has something to do with the words, but also kind of clickstream information and kind of local search and things like that. And so there's a lot that goes into web search. A big part of that is the language. Text classification, spam filtering. Again, spam filtering is a case where it's part language, part not language. We'll talk more about spam filtering later, and so on. These are the kinds of things you can do in the domain of natural language. We're no longer trying so hard to tell stories, funny or otherwise. We're trying to build things like this, and there has been a lot of traction. There's a lot of stuff we can build. Right, we're not yet to C3PO, but we actually can now translate Russian, which we couldn't do in the 50s, even though they thought we'd be able to do it by the 60s. But now, today, we can. Okay, it only took something like 12 times longer than they thought it would.